Hi everyone, thank you for joining us here on day one of Kiwi's Beyond the Lunchbox digital conference. This next session is sponsored by Wild Planet Foods and features their very own founder and president, William F. Carvalho. He'll be sharing with us the state of our oceans and the importance of sustainable fishing practices. Bill's talk is extremely eye-opening and will definitely make you think twice the next time you go to the grocery store. Don't forget to enter our daily giveaways, and if you haven't registered already, enter your email address to claim your digital swag bag filled with coupons, recipes, and digital downloads. And check out our website, kiwimagonline.com, and read our digital issues for free. Up next is our editor's pick review for Wild Planet Wild Sardines, and then we'll hear from Bill. So enjoy! If you care about sustainability, especially in our oceans, then it's high time that you try sardines. Hear me out. Sardines are low on the food chain, which keeps the marine ecosystem healthy and in balance. And they're a great sustainable alternative to tuna, which is very popular but tends to be overfished. Sardines are also super healthy too. They're packed with omega-3, protein, vitamin D, iron, and calcium. And they're perfect to add to any salad, grain bowl, taco, pasta dish, or power pack snack. You can head to Wild Planet's website for some great ideas. They have some wonderful recipes on there. Wild Planet offers 7 sardine varieties. I have a few of them right here, some in olive oil, some just in water, some lightly smoked, some with light salt as well. And they're super delicious, and I highly suggest that you give them a try. So you can head to wildplanetfoods.com to learn more and to find a store near you.
The question, will there be fish for our grandchildren, would have seemed absurd 100 years ago. Who would have thought that the human race could deplete the vast oceans which cover 71% of the Earth's surface? And yet here we are in 2020 discussing this question in all seriousness. Will there be fish for our grandchildren? To me, that means I have 2 grandchildren, 3 now, 3 and 8. But many of you in the Kiwi audience are parents with just children. And so speaking of grandchildren, it could be my grandchildren or yours, which may come along and be the children of your children. How precious really all of these children of ours are. And their needs should really be our focus and our priority. But the idea that there's no assurance that there'll be fish in the future is spawned from the many scientific projections that show that by the year 2050, there may be no viable wild fisheries left at the rate of exploitation. Now, that could be overstated. That could be a statement that doesn't take into consideration that there will be many species that will be viable. But the sense of a wild biosphere that teems with life and that is prolific and that truly fosters the sustenance of life in the oceans and contributes to the sustenance of life on land, that's a very real concern. I read recently a report published by Oceana that says that the oceans, if properly managed, have the ability to sustain 1 billion people every day with their meals. Every day, 1 billion. So really, the idea of saving the oceans is connected to feeding the world, which by 2050 is supposed to have something like 9 billion people. So we're talking about an issue that really couldn't be more important to all of us who are considering the future of our children and our grandchildren. And we're talking about a food source from the oceans that is possibly the most important food source that we have and that children need. A recent FDA and EPA consumption advice document was launched in January 18th of 2017. And there The FDA Deputy Commissioner Stephen Ostroff made this comment. Fish are an important source of protein and other nutrients for young children and women who are maybe pregnant or are breastfeeding. This advice clearly shows the great diversity of fish in the U.S. market that they can consume safely, which is true. And they provided this very excellent tool to help families understand which fish are the right fish for family consumption, even for children's consumption, and in what quantities. And that is an excellent resource dated back to January 18, 2017. But to address the future of fish in the oceans, we need to talk about a range of factors, many factors that contribute to the sustainability of the oceans that aren't related to fishing practice. Those factors are climate change. They involve how we consume as human beings. And so these factors are to be taken into consideration along with the kind of fishing practices that we engage in. So let's consider these three things that affect sustainability of the oceans: climate change, fishing practices, and consumption habits. Regarding climate change, of course, that's a whole topic all to itself. It involves how we generate energy, how we employ transportation, what kind of carbon footprint we leave, and how we sequester carbon. It also centers on how we produce our food. And I believe there was already a presentation in this conference given by Jeff from Rodale that discusses regenerative agriculture. And I know Jeff, and in fact, I'm sure that Jeff in the last 30 days has forgotten more than I'll ever know about regenerative agriculture. So I'll leave that to him. I really have not much to say about that, or about the issues of energy generation, carbon footprint. Those are all matters for scientific inputs for us to assist us in making wise decisions. So I'd like to focus on the area where Wild Planet is engaged, and that is in how the oceans are fished. What are the fishing practices, and how does that impact the viability and sustainability of the ocean's resources? And just a quick comment about what Wild Planet is and who I am. I started Wild Planet in 2004, having been in the seafood industry for 14 years prior to that. In 2001, I took my family to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and there was a display, Oceans in Crisis. And as I took my family through this, I was looking at the clear evidence that the oceans were in crisis by man's abuse of them. And as an industry insider, I knew what some of those abuses were. And in fact, I wasn't squeaky clean regarding those abuses myself in my own company's practices. And so in 2001, I decided to make a complete change to only sustainably sourced products. And from that 2001 decision was born Wild Planet. I chose that name because it really communicates that the ocean, and indeed the land, in its wild state, is its most balanced, healthy, and productive state. And we simply cannot continue to domesticate the earth or the ocean with impunity. The wild ocean resources are the best model for producing food for an appreciative human race. So getting back to fishing practices, what is the basis for considering something is sustainable and something is not sustainable? That's an important question, because since 2004, there have been many people who have entered into the space to sell products, and the word sustainable is important to make a sale. But what does the word mean? The word sustainable is being applied to many things now that really still are egregious when it comes to what they do to the ocean resources. The first thing that a sustainable practice must do is be selective. It has to target the species that it's attempting to catch. It has to take only what can be properly yielded in a sustainable yield calculation. And it needs to take members of that species that are old enough to make it worthwhile taking them. They shouldn't be targeting and capturing babies of the species, because that just means there's no yield for the taking of that life. Around the world, the catch methods that are non-selective result in, here's a number it's hard to get your head around. It results annually in 10 million metric tons of bycatch discard. Now that means that in the process of taking some fish, these other fish come aboard, they're killed, they die aboard. They're perfectly good to eat, but they're the wrong fish. Maybe they're too small. And so those are discarded overboard. 10 million metric tons. That is 22 billion pounds of food that just goes overboard. That is a non-selective fishery. And there are fisheries that practice that today that have finagled the definition of sustainability to apply it to their products. Some of the products that we might be familiar with, and Wild Planet started in the tuna business, and that has a little simple story that my Portuguese family, my grandmother, who immigrated from the Azores back during World War I, she always canned her own tuna. She wasn't going to eat the store-bought stuff for a number of reasons. Maybe it was too expensive. I don't know. But she canned her own tuna in glass jars, and that's how I was raised, eating this albacore tuna. We would go down and get that from the boats in Eureka, bring it home. It'd be an annual event, 400 pounds. The whole family's there. We're cutting up all this fish, putting it in mason jars with just a little bit of salt, nothing else, cooking it in the jar. And that was a spectacular product. And that product led me into selling tuna and selling it in this same home canned way of just pure tuna steaks in a can, cooked in their own juice. But I regress. The catch of the tuna that we use is pole and line caught. The fishermen actually catch the fish one by one, exactly what they're trying to get. They catch fish from a school, and the fish tend to be all the same size in a school, and they bring them aboard, and nothing else is captured. The majority of tuna, however, are caught by a method called purse seining, and purse seining is a decent method to catch tuna if you target a school of fish that are of the right size and that are free swimming and not mixed up with a bunch of other fish. But what the fishermen have discovered over the decades, just since the 80s really, is that if they deploy a floating device that provides some shade, then that looks like a patch of seaweed or something, and small fish tend to go to that floating device for protection. They're hiding under there, other fish come, and before long, you've got this big swarm of fish that used to be dispersed over many square miles of ocean. They've all now congregated under these floating devices. Those devices are beaconed, and many are sonar equipped to communicate back to the fishing vessel, wherever it is, exactly what the aggregation density is. So fishermen aren't really fishing, they're just capturing what they've trapped under these floating devices. But the things that are trapped under those floating devices are, unfortunately, many of the baby tuna. Now, this is a tuna that could grow to 200 pounds, but it's captured at 2 pounds. That is what I respectfully call tuna infanticide. If you're killing off the babies, that has a bad ending. And so that's a practice that allows the fishermen to catch all kinds of fish very productively, very efficiently. They even defend it because they say we have a lower carbon footprint because we don't have to run around looking for fish as much. Well, come on. This is non-selective fishing, and many of the fish that are caught along with the tuna of all sizes, are sharks, some turtles, Japanese amberjack, mahi-mahi, triggerfish, parrotfish, just the list goes on and on. And those fish come aboard, and instead of being also frozen and taken back to shore and sold for food, they're dumped to make room for more tuna. Therein lies a grave abuse and disrespect for the sanctity of these life forms. These are magnificent creatures that do not deserve to be treated like an iron ore or some other unliving material. So that is bothersome, and it is done because it's more cost effective. And why do we choose to use egregious, destructive methods of harvesting our oceans? Because it results in a lower price point at retail. Sure, you can get 3 cans of albacore for $5. You can get 10 for 10 on light tuna. But what is the real cost of cheap tuna? It is a devastatingly high cost to the planet. And it's actually a sabotaging of the grandchildren's future. So for that reason, it's critical that we rethink what we're willing to buy and what we're willing to support. And Wild Planet, as I mentioned, buys pole and line. Other companies do also and sell only pole and line and do not have anything to do with those other methods. And we feel good about that and about bringing that choice to consumers so they can make that choice as well. So the fishing practices that we are practicing, sometimes we just speak in terms of overfishing. Oh yes, there's just too much overfishing. Yes, there is too much overfishing. And when there's too much fishing, then there's not enough to go around. But more than overfishing, it is really that we have too much wrong fishing. We're wrongly fishing the oceans. And these highly productive, often government subsidized, huge super tuna fleets are going to third world countries, island nations, and they're buying the rights to catch the fish near shore. They're buying those rights from the government that uses them for whatever their revenue programs are. But in so doing, they're vacuuming up essentially the tuna and all those other species that I mentioned that are dumped at sea dead and unutilized. They're vacuuming that all up so that today there are reports all over the world in the island nations and the Philippines of the local people who used to fish for a living and bring back to the local port the daily catch. They have to go farther and farther and farther away to catch less and less fish because the fish are gone. Food security for those local communities is a grave issue. It's just sort of upsetting to realize that the people that are eating that tuna that's being caught and that's depriving them of their other fish that they would have fed their families and also sold locally and fed the community, the people that are buying that tuna are here in the United States, largely, and in Europe. And we could easily afford to pay a proper price for fish that are properly caught. But instead, we are unwitting accomplices in this rush to sell cheap tuna. And that rush to sell cheap tuna is like the gold rush. It's of limited duration. And that duration is coming to its cycle end. So when it comes to protecting the oceans and restoring their sustainability, a move to selective harvest practices that are well known and well documented and well researched, that is certainly key. The final point that I made earlier on when I mentioned climate change, fishing practices, and then consumption habits, how we consume all foods is really important. How we consume from the ocean is also important. The human race prefers top of the food chain fish. We love salmon, we love tuna, swordfish, big fat fillet of something. People prefer that. And so when there isn't enough of that, what do? Well, most of the salmon sold in the world today is farm raised because there's not enough salmon wild caught to support the appetite for salmon. And yet the ocean pyramid is a true pyramid. And if we're consuming up here in the tip of the pyramid, these predator fish, all these bottom rungs in the food ladder are much broader and deeper and have much higher volume of productivity. Those are the fish that we should really be shifting to in order to eat properly from the ocean ecosystem. Those are the fish that are so prolific that there isn't even a market for all of them for our consumption. These fish include anchovies, sardines, mackerel, herring, smelt, capelin. There's lots of these small fish. They're called forage fish. If we were to shift our consumption to consume as the oceans are giving us fish, then we would have a lot more yield from the oceans for a hungry human race. Let's talk about that a little bit. If you go to the grocery store today and you go just to the canned seafood department, you'll see about 70% of the shelves are filled with tuna items, mainly from two species, just albacore and skipjack. 70% of the shelves have facings of different brands and different, a lot of it's all the same, just different piece of paper on the outside. But it's these items, these tuna items. The other 30% might be clams, sardines, salmon, and numerous other items. But if we were to rearrange the chairs here and make the seafood department reflect what the oceans are giving us, it'd be about 20% tuna, and it would be 80% all these other things in this order. Anchovies, mackerel, sardines. Those fish are very abundant, but we're not necessarily accustomed to eating them unless you were raised by a Portuguese family, and then you're well accustomed to eating them. And so what happens to that fish since we don't eat that fish? What ends up happening is the value of that fish is practically wasted. There is a market for that fish. That fish is caught and it's squeezed to extract its oil. And that oil is then refined and it's put in these little clear pills, and people are popping these fish oil pills. The rest of the fish gets ground up, becomes fish meal. Fish meal goes to feed aquaculture fish, often salmon and shrimp, and then we eat those fish instead. Well, in this process of capturing this fish, squeezing the oil out, making fish meal, feeding it to these other animals, harvesting them from the ponds, and bringing them back to the grocery store, in that process, we're losing about 7 to 10 times the original protein and nutritive value. And for those of you who take fish oil capsules, then you end up burping up fish oil all day. But you could just have a can of anchovies or sardines and get the fish oil, and you get a whole meal along with it for the same price, essentially. So that is a fundamental problem, is our being a little finicky about what kind of fish we want to eat. Eating lower in the food chain is an important shift in how we should consume from the oceans. If we eat lower in the food chain, we'll be eating probably healthier fish than if we keep eating things that the food chain then is converted to domesticated, aquaculture, farmed, and then brought back and we eat that. It really tastes different the few times I ever try it. So we want to really give consideration to that. Wild Planet has tried to launch a lot of unique items that are low in the food chain items to provide that kind of choice for families to eat lower in the food chain and enjoy these more abundant, readily available, and highly nutritious products. Now, people say, "Oh, but I'm not going to eat a sardine. That sounds terrible. My father used to eat them, or my grandfather used to eat them." At events, we challenge people to try it. And do you know who always, almost without fail, who in the family enjoys sardines the most? It is children. It is incredible. You give a little fish like this to a child, they think it's cute. They're really into it. They like it. And boy, if we could help our children to access that kind of food from the oceans, then we would really be doing something good for them and good for the planet. What about the idea that, well, we shouldn't be eating any fish at all? We should just be making plant-based tuna, plant-based fish. Eating plants is absolutely the right thing. But eating plants from regenerative agriculture, this movement of plant-based foods that are big ag produced from genetically modified strains that are commercially fertilized with petrochemical fertilizers, use of pesticides, use of herbicides, and then highly processed to mimic the flesh of tuna, that is certainly not for me. And I just don't see where that's the real answer to the issues of sustainability, and certainly not the answer for good health. So shifting consumption to organic plants as a supplement, and supplementing those organic plants with fish, with wild-caught fish that are sustainably sourced, low in the food chain, is certainly the right thing to do. To come up with a solution for the environment requires sacrifice, and it requires commitment. It requires a certain determination and tenacity of principle to take a stand for what is truly right. Commitments are not easily made by governments, because governments tend to let the marketplace decide issues. And in the marketplace, you have brands and you have retailers and commercial interests that are conflicted by their own economic welfare and interests. Really, consumers have to drive a shift in consumption patterns and a shift in what we are producing from the oceans. If the consumer demands it, then a business will sell it. Kind of as simple as that. Wild Planet has designed a lineup of products that meet the highest possible standards of sustainable harvest. And that's why Greenpeace has ranked us over and over #1 in sustainable sourcing policy. And we encourage other brands to become partners in that same mission. It's our goal to demonstrate how to show respect and reverence for the marine ecosystem. It deserves respect. It's magnificent life in abundance, in a biodiverse mix that is miraculous, and it shouldn't be abused. It shouldn't be profiteered. We shouldn't have this race to extract from this living environment assets for a financial portfolio. Can you eat a financial portfolio? If you do, it'll probably make you very sick. So don't try that. But boy, can grandchildren eat sardines in the future. I love something that was said many years ago by someone who was quite enlightened. I believe he was. At least he had some excellent vision. It was Sitting Bull. It's a quote that I love of his when he was speaking to whoever the United States representative was that was negotiating with the tribe. Um, Sitting Bull said, "Let's put our minds together to see what kind of life we can make for our grandchildren." That's the right attitude of a patriarch. And he was an ancestor of his people. And really, all of us are ancestors. But we should really ask ourselves, what kind of ancestor am I? Our actions now will write the history of what kind of ancestor each one of us is. And how great that this collaboration of parents at the Kiwi convention this week is bringing issues to the fore that we can all consider, collaborate on, and act upon. And we certainly hope that we can be a partner with you in doing that. Thank you so much.